Sugar beets first started in the Red River Valley in 1919 when 11 acres were grown by a farmer near East Grand Forks, Minnesota. The crop yielded 6.5 tons per acre for a total of 72 tons. The beets were shipped to American Beet Sugar Company, the parent company of present American Crystal, at Chaska, Minnesota, for processing. In 1920, a dozen East Grand Forks, Crookston, Fisher area farmers contracted and grew nearly 300 acres of sugar beets. A few acres never made it to harvest, and those tons harvested were sent to processors in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Chaska for processing and testing. Most of these original dozen families still grow beets today. Grower and company officials soon agreed a factory should be built in the valley. This first factory was completed in 1926 at East Grand Forks. The building of this factory, with a 2,000-ton daily slice capacity, and the formation of the Sugar Beet Growers Association, started the large-scale development of the Red River Valley sugar beet industry. Over the years, other factories have been built along the Red River Valley area. Moorhead in 1948 and Crookston in 1954 in Minnesota, Drayton in 1965 and Hillsboro in 1974 in North Dakota. In 1976, the original East Grand Forks factory was rebuilt and significantly enlarged. These 5 factories with a daily slicing capacity of 28,500 tons are today's American Crystal Sugar Company, which is now owned by 1,761 valley sugar beet growers. Nearly 6 million tons of beets are produced from 335,000 acres. The area has become the largest beet sugar producing area in the United States. At the annual meetings of American Crystal Sugar Company and the Red River Valley Sugar Beet Growers Association in December of 1986, 101 of the valley industry's pioneer families, who had been identified as being part of the industry's development for 50 years or more, were honored. As the industry has developed, new families have entered the business. The younger grower today is building on many accomplishments of these early growers, achieved through their hard work, dedication, and innovations. The results have made the Red River Valley sugar beet agricultural practices the most efficient and revered in the entire world. A solid base has been built, with the modern technology and applied education being displayed by the present valley sugar beet growers. The sugar beet industry in the Red River Valley should remain viable and secure for future generations. The scenes in the film you're about to see are an edited collection of old 16mm beet growing and harvesting scenes in the Red River Valley. It's a sequence of historical sugar beet agriculture in the valley from the late 1920s to the present time. It's a sequence of innovations, creative application, and dedication by courageous growers. The purpose of the film is to show the struggle and accomplishments in the evolution of the sugar beet agriculture in the Red River Valley sugar industry. It all started with horses and plow. Harrowing with horses covered ground a little faster. The seedbed had to be floated or dragged to make it level. The only fertilizer used in the early days was phosphate. It was generally applied with a grain drill loaded by hand. Notice the man spills his pour, but the little girl is not quite so clumsy. As always, good help pays off. A packer was used ahead of the planter. The planter is a horse-drawn 4-row planter. And a note about beet seed. The early seed used was all multigerm, several seed sprouts to each seed ball. Upwards of 20 pounds of seed per acre was used to get sufficient germination for stand establishment. The first seed all came from Europe. The seed was drilled with no spacing, many plants emerging unevenly. Now we're modernizing with early steel wheel tractors on seedbed preparation, even to a 2-bottom tumble bug to eliminate back furrows. For many years, sweet clover was used as a plow-down crop in the summer fallow year prior to sugar beets. Cultivating was done with 2 horses and a 4-row cultivator, and a guy sometimes along to see that everything was done right. How about this for a speedy cultivator? No more excuses for coming home late from that field at night. Thinning was a real cumbersome chore, all by hand. Hole blocking and finger thinning of the multigerm seed sprouts to a single plant every foot. All done on hands and knees. Now here it's progressed to a long handle hoe being used instead of a short handle hoe to form those blocks. People on hands and knees still had to be used to finger thin the blocks to one plant. Now we're really getting smart. Let them sit and work. By the way, these were Mexican nationals imported under government rules to help accomplish the labor-intensive blocking, thinning, and weeding process in early beet culture. Also saved in the shoe leather. Cultivating progressed to rubber-tired tractors and more rows, but it still required more people than the tractor operator to guide the outer-pulled cultivator units. And as you can see, the rows were not always too straight. Remember the guys with the long-handled hoes blocking ahead of the finger thinners? Well, now they've been replaced with a cultivator forming the blocks by crossing the rows. There were a number of different spacings tried in order to come up with sufficient blocks to make a final stand. With a couple of cultivators and more speed, a lot of ground could be covered. There was much counting and measuring by the field man and grower, searching for the best blocked stand possible. But it still took finger thinners on hands and knees to thin the blocks to a single plant. And it's not hard to tell the final thin stand. Grower ingenuity never ceases. There must be a way to leave more blocks with more single beets in it in one operation. The introduction of the monogerm seed, single seedling to one seed ball, greatly enhanced this theory. The idea came from the Dixie cotton chopper. This experimental Dixie beet thinner was adjustable to block in prescribed size blocks down the row. It was the forerunner of numerous versions of more precise and sophisticated mechanical thinners that we know today. And here's the crop getting its final cultivation. And they'd try anything. Some early engineers attempted some unique, if not comical, innovations. Is it a thinner? Is it a topper? Maybe some guy practicing kicking for a spot in the National Football League, who knows? Harvest was a back-breaking, miserable task. It too started with horse-drawn equipment and lots of hand labor that was hard to come by in the quantities needed. Early one-row lifters loosened and lifted the beet above ground. Large numbers of strong backs were then needed to hand pile the lifted beets. Then hand top and hand fork the top beets into wagons or trucks for delivery to receiving sites. Workers piled several rows of on-top beets into another single pile with their roots facing out, preparatory for hand topping. They generally bump two beets together to knock off some of the dirt. Hand toppers, imported migrants, prisoners of war, and local farm wives were all used at harvest time. The hand toppers used a long knife with a hook on the end. Each beet was hooked and lifted with the knife into the other hand. The knife was then used to cut off the tops and crown portion of the beet with generally one stroke. Note the prisoners of war relaxed manner with a small child and the guard with a gun. The top beet was then placed into a smooth area or aisle between the piles of on-top beets previously made. A V-type sled or drag was used to make this smooth clearing or aisle for depositing the top beets into small piles or a windrow. The beet by this time was relatively free of dirt and tops, and every beet was handled individually and literally by hand. These top beets in the small piles or windrows were then hand-forked into wagons or trucks. The forks used were multi-tined, with a small knob on the end of each tine to keep from sticking the beet. And it was back-breaking work. The fork-loaded trucks were then hauled to the rail receiving stations located near the farms. The first beets in the valley were hand-forked off the trucks and wagons directly into rail cars. The trucks were carefully loaded to their full capacity. As you can see, no load limits in these days. As the East Grand Forks factory started operating in 1926, permanent rail stations with beet dumps soon took over. A truck or wagon was side dumped by means of an A-frame cable hoist. The side of the truck box was hinged, as was the total box, allowing it to tip the beets out into a hopper. The beets were then elevated into the rail cars by means of elevator belts and potato chain shaker cleaners. Pressure to secure adequate help for the back-breaking harvest tasks continued. World War II created immense beet labor shortages. Innovations concentrated on eliminating as much hand labor as possible. One of the first harvest innovations was the lifter buncher machine, designed with the idea of replacing the hand bumping and piling of the on-top beet preparatory to hand topping. The lifted beet dropped into a small box which dumped every little ways, and it was unsuccessful because the beets became tangled and required more time of the person doing the topping. The next innovations were more successful. The beet was topped in the ground, lifted and deposited in a clear aisle windrow, all in one operation, getting a little smarter all the time. The beet was topped by a knife and was lifted by a set of spade shoes and then conveyed at ground level by a moving belt on an adjustable conveyor to the cleared aisle, ready for loading. A set of finder wheels going over the beet set the knife properly for topping. A potato chain pickup took the topped and lifted beet to the adjustable conveyor for depositing in the windrow. The tops were conveyed into a separate windrow. There were several different manufacturers and a number of variations of this topping and windrowing equipment. They basically eliminated the hand piling and topping, thereby eliminating much of the harvest labor. Getting a little quicker all the time, but still some bugs to work out. Just a step or two away, as we'll see in a moment. Now this unit was topping and lifting the top beet up an elevator, but actually dropping it back in a windrow. Now it's obvious they were close to a one harvest operation. The next step was to eliminate the hand forking of the windrowed top beets into wagons or trucks. Note the long shape of these beets. One of the first complete operations tried was loading a cart being pulled adjacent to the topper loader. The cart was then taken to the end of the field where an A-frame hoist dumped the beets into a cross conveyor which loaded a truck that would take the beets to the receiving station. But as you can see, this still involved a separate and extra operation. Very quickly, this led to loading directly into trucks by means of potato chain elevators. Steel-wheeled tractors were about to go also. It's nice to know there were some dry harvests in those years. The pressure of lack of labor, intensified by the Second World War, made it imperative to push for harvest mechanization in the late 40s and early 50s. The next major reduction in harvest labor came with these loaders. Some of the common names of these loaders were John Deere, Rasmussen, Espy, and Oliver, along with homemade or revamped units. Keeping the tractor on the row was a touchy and strenuous task. Some of the loaders pulled the trucks backwards to load them. And note the name Ross on the truck door, a name as familiar then as it is today in the Crookston area. There were a number of different and difficult variations of the windrow feeder devices. All these units in their field trials drew a lot of attention. It wasn't long before the machines were improved commercially and were common stock items at farm equipment dealers. Beet tops were sometimes saved for cattle feed, and good help, and good-looking help, was employed in their recovery and loading. At the same time improvements were being made on the farm, improvements were being made at the receiving stations. This is an early portable rail loader on wheels. Note the old truck. These led to complete pilers like this one, where trucks were side dumped and tear samples were caught mechanically. Grower and equipment manufacturers combined their talents back on the farm and soon developed a harvester that did the complete operation, topping, lifting, cleaning, and elevating the beets into a truck in one operation. One of the early Scott Urschel prototypes lifted the on-top beet up a chain, then topped it and loaded it into a truck or cart. The rolling wheel of this harvester picks up tops first, then spikes and lifts the beets. Not quite a one operation, but a speedy variance. This is a converted road grader with a massive top finder and topper unit. They didn't all get sufficient reviews to go commercial. And neither did this rolling cage harvester. This one-row International was a hit. This huge two-row Valley-made Harval was the rage and controversy of its time. They all brought a lot of attention and well-dressed visitors to observe. And they all handled large volumes of dirt, of which much went into the trucks. The next thrust over the coming years had to turn to developing better topping and dirt elimination on the harvesters. Such things as picking tables, kicker wheels, and finally our present grab roll developed. All this became very necessary in order to have a clean, well-topped beet fit for long storage periods. One of the distinct advantages of the early hand harvest was the well-topped dirt and trash-free beet. Note the massive amounts of dirt on this Harval wheeled harvester. Far too much dirt went into the rail cars or storage piles. And again note, another dusty harvest. Remember some of those early scenes where many people were used in hand piling, topping, and loading, versus this scene where 3 one-row units operate without any hand labor. Now it's obvious the next step was the multi-row efficient harvester common to today's harvest operation. And harvest was tough. It dragged on into late October and November because of lack of adequate harvesters, receiving equipment, receiving sites, and particularly rail cars. Scenes such as this in 24 inches of snow were not unusual, so it's not quite so tough today, is it? Acres had been restricted with only the East Grand Forks factory in existence from 1926 until Moorhead was built in 1948 and Crookston in 1954. This is the Crookston factory shortly after being built. Trucks of beets entered over the scales and dispersed to several new high-speed pilers for unloading and piling with long booms. The yards were filled with both truck and rail car piles. The rail cars that could not be immediately sliced were unloaded into car piles with clamshell cranes, and both type of piles were reloaded with cranes into end-dumping yard trucks for delivery to the factory wet hopper. The rail car beets able to be directly sliced were unloaded at the wet hopper. A major accomplishment was made when no rail cars were needed in the beet operation. Transition from then to now is even more dramatic. With the building of the Drayton factory in 1965, some pressure for more beet acreage was relieved. When the growers took the initiative and bought the company, forming the present cooperative in 1973, expansion of the beet industry was accelerated more than ever in Valley history. Since 1973, East Grand Forks was rebuilt, Hillsboro was added, and significant expansion of slicing capacity was added to all factories, giving a current daily slice capacity of 28,500 tons. This versus 2,000 tons daily slice in 1926, when the Valley sugar industry started. Harvest accomplishments on the farm have made the Valley the envy of the world beet industry. The high-speed, large-scale harvest operations are unmatchable anywhere. Beet harvest and receiving is the fastest, largest, and most efficient of any place in the world. A single super piler handles upwards of 10,000 tons every day. The 5 factory yards and 23 outside receiving sites harvest upwards of 450,000 tons a day, weather permitting. The massive tonnage and long campaigns have led to the most innovative and efficient storage methods in the world. The pre-cooled deep freeze concept and the massive controlled storage sheds allow beets to be safely stored into April or May for slicing. These buildings are huge, 180 feet free span wide and 520 feet long, 55 feet high at the center, and 32 feet high at the walls, with 2 15-foot plenum areas on each side, making the building 210 feet wide in total. They hold 50,000 tons of beets each. Reloading is done with large front-end loaders into 32-ton yard trucks. And into large semi-trucks that haul the outside storage piles on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week basis to the factory's wet hoppers, where the beets enter the factory for processing into sugar. As stated at the beginning, a solid base has been built, with modern technology and applied education being displayed by our present growers. the beet industry in the Red River Valley will remain viable and secure for future generations.